Welcome. This is a seminar of the Harvard China Project on Energy, Economy, and Environment based in the Harvard Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. This is our second to last seminar. It's online. We're doing it because our speaker is in Sweden. We've been trying to move towards more in-person seminars, but in this case, we have to do it online. I want to mention that because the topic of the seminar is really at the intersection of engineering and economics. I'm getting a little feedback. Are you getting some, Kelly? Because it's at the intersection of technology and economics, that Mun Ho, the lead economist in the China Project, will introduce our speaker and also moderate the questions. But I'm just weighing in a little bit first with a couple of things. First, I want to mention that next week will be our final seminar of the semester, and it's going to be in person here in Pierce Hall, room 100F. This is going to be a very interesting seminar. I want to encourage everybody to come. It's actually a professor of history from Harvard. His name is Arnab Ghosh. He's a professor of Chinese history, and he's going to talk to us about China's massive program to develop small hydro starting in the 1970s. And it was a very successful program with some very interesting features that ended up, I think, ultimately creating, I don't know, it was tens and tens of thousands of small hydro facilities across China. And it's very much an interesting insight into how China mobilizes, energies to conduct big mass mobilizations like this of energy technologies. It is relevant to the current times with other types of energy, but it's also very interesting to learn about small hydro in particular, which is something we in the China Project haven't looked at much at. So I want to encourage people to come to that talk next week. Other than that, I just have a little bit of housekeeping to say before I turn it over to Mun. And the first is that, as in all of these online seminars that we do, you'll be able to ask your question directly by raising your hand in the reactions section. And so that means everybody's microphone is live. You have to keep your microphone muted until then, and Mun will call on you. And so then you turn on your microphone and ask your question. Then you can have a little back and forth with the speaker, which we prefer over other moderated Q&As. And then the last thing is just to say that this talk is being recorded. So take that into account. Okay, Mun.
Thank you. So we are very glad to welcome Xiaoming today. He is doing his PhD at Chalmers University in Gothenburg, Sweden, in the Department of Space, Earth, and Environment. He has been writing about electricity issues and building energy issues, but today he's going to talk about the cost of renewable and how social characteristics determine the resource potential and international trade. So as Chris says, when he's talking, just keep the questions only to the technical clarifying questions, and then we have a discussion section at the end, and we will end at 4 o'clock. Okay, Xiaoming, it's all yours. You can share your screen.
Thank you very much, guys. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Good, I can
Perfect.
see your screen.
So thank you very much. I'm very happy to see many of you via Zoom. And good afternoon to those in US. Good evening for those who are from Europe, and good morning for those who are in China. So today I will talk about the impact of country-specific discount rates on the cost and the trade potential of renewable energy. My name is Xiaoming, and I'm a PhD student from Chalmers University of Technology. So this is a study I collaborated with Lina Reichenberg, Frederick Haydenus, and David Daniels. So when you look at this term, global renewable resource potential, what is your first reaction? For those who already know a lot of studies or reports about this topic, your reaction might be, Why this crap again? Hell no, because you already heard a lot about this. But if I ask a stranger, a random one from the street, his or her first reaction might be, how much? Do we have sufficient or enough renewable energy to cover the current electricity demand? And the second reaction might be, is it cheap or expensive? For most of the people in Europe now, they understand the importance of electricity cost in their everyday life. And when it comes to evaluating the cost competitiveness of different technologies, typically the metric levelized cost of electricity is being used. And in the following presentation, I will mention it as LCOE. So LCOE typically incorporates the overnight investment cost, the fixed operation and maintenance cost, and variable cost. In addition, the LCOE metric also includes capacity factor and a discount rate. As most of you know, discount rate reflects the investment risks for renewable project. It is affected by political and macroeconomic stability, the maturity of financial markets, the preference of policies. The discount rate normally varies from industry to industry, from country to country, and also varies over time. But if we look at the previous studies or reports, when it comes to this kind of global evaluation, typically a uniform discount rate is used. So, or in some cases, two values are used, a lower value for OECD countries and a higher value for the rest of the world. So typical examples are those World Energy Outlook from IEA or Renewable Energy Outlook from IRENA. And when it comes to the global energy system model, this kind of models always use uniform discount rate to calculate the future electricity costs. So for our study, instead of using a uniform discount rate, we try to use country-specific discount rate. We try to quantify how would this affect the cost and the potential for renewable energy supply for different countries. As we know, renewable energy resources such as wind and solar are widely available and abundant. However, they are not evenly distributed. For the countries that lack of high quality renewable resources in the renewable future, they might want to import renewable energy from other countries. And this effect might be further enhanced if there is further electrification or electrical fuel productions to decarbonize other energy sectors. So for the second stage of our study, we try to incorporate the electricity demand to the analysis. By doing so, we try to quantify which countries might have the potential for export and which countries might be the potential importers. So far, I'm sure you have a clear clue what I want to do for this study. So now I will give a very simple summary of our research question. So the first research question is how country-specific discount rates might affect the cost and the potential for developing renewable energy. The second research question is which countries might have the greatest potential for export and which countries might be the potential importers. So these are the two research questions we cover so far for the study. To address these research questions, we use three metrics based on LCOE. The first metric is renewable LCOE with uniform discount rate. So this is business as usual. We calculate the levelized cost of electricity for the entire world with a uniform discount rate, just like previous studies or reports. And the second, we try to calculate the LCOE with country-specific discount rates. So here are the data we use for the calculation. By saying calculate the LCOE for the entire world, I mean the entire world is divided into many grid cells with a spatial resolution of 1 kilometer at the equator. So in total, we calculate the LCOE for wind and solar for around 500 million grid cells for the entire world. As for the data used for the calculation, we use Area 5 data for solar radiation and wind profile. The Area 5 data has a good representation of the wind speed profile in terms of temporal resolution. However, the spatial resolution is relatively coarse. It has a spatial resolution of around 31 kilometers at the equator, we know that wind speed might experience very fast change in such spatial resolution. So we also combine the data from Global Wind Atlas, because the Global Wind Atlas has a good spatial resolution, which is 1 kilometer at the equator, but the speed recorded there is average speed. By combining these two data sets, we can generate wind speed with decent representation of both spatial and temporal resolution. Then we calculate the hourly capacity factor for wind and solar. We average it, got this annual average wind and solar capacity factor for the calculation. As for the cost assumption, we use the cost for 2050. So we assume a 100% renewable system for 2050, and the cost estimation is based on the data from ARENA. For the cost of solar is roughly 320. For the cost of wind is roughly $800 per kilowatt. And as for the discount rate, for the case of uniform discount rate, we use 5%. For the case of country-specific discount rate, we add country risk premium estimates from Damodaran to the 5%. And from this map, you can see this country-specific discount rate value for different countries. So for advanced economies like Germany or the US, the country-specific discount rate is relatively low, around 5%. But for countries now experiencing socio-political unrest or economic crisis, the discount rate is relatively high, such as Argentina. As I mentioned in the introduction, we also want to incorporate electricity demand in the analysis. So this is a metric we introduced. This is actually a new metric, which is called the Renewable LCOE, available for export. In this metric, we try to add electricity demand in the analysis. So this figure will help you to better understand this metric. Here, we have the supply curve, which is green color. We have the demand curve, which is red color. The x-axis here represents the supply potential relative to demand. So here, the value 1 means the supply equals to demand. And the y-axis represents the cost. For this point, the supply meets demand is a balance point, and the cost corresponding to this point is the marginal cost for a country to fulfill its domestic demand. It represents the marginal cost for a country to supply its entire demand. So this is the third metric we use for the evaluation. And here are the data we use for the calculation. For the demand estimation, we use the data from SSP2 scenario, and the value is for 2050. And we assume for wind and solar, we assume the 10% of the suitable land is used for wind installation, and 5% for the suitable land is used for solar installation. And we also assign an extra cost for wind and solar farms, which are far away from population dense areas. On top of this, if we assume or if we find a cost for trade, we can also quantify the potential of export. So basically, we have the value here, renewable LCOE available for export, and then we have a cost for trade, and the difference here can direct us to find out the potential for export. So this is the method that we use to calculate the export potential for each country. Here is a figure to show how we find the suitable land. So here is an example for mainland of China. So first, we exclude some land that are not suitable for wind installation, such as population dense area, the red color part, and also the pink color part, which is a protected area. So wind cannot be installed in such an area. And apart from this, we assume 10% of the rest land can be used for the installation of wind power. So the light blue color here, and also a bit of dark color here. For the green part, since this is the area very far away from population dense area, it might need to construct a lot of transmission grids, so we also exclude such area for the installation of wind power. I know Harvard China project has some publications for wind deployment. Maybe we can discuss more afterwards. And for the case of solar, we have similar assumptions, but we exclude forest for the installation of solar. So far, I have talked about the method we used for this study. Now I will come to the results section. So first, let's look at the LCOE for solar for the entire world based on uniform discount rate. So basically, we calculate the cost for solar for the entire world with a uniform discount rate. From this map, we can see a low cost of solar around the Tropic of Cancer and in most of African countries. But if we apply country-specific discount rate to account for this heterogeneity of investment risks, we'll find that the cost for solar in African countries are relatively high now, and also in countries such as Argentina. So in this case, if you consider this heterogeneity of investment risks, the cost of solar are actually higher in countries with very good solar radiation data. But the cost for solar is still relatively low in countries such as the US, Saudi Arabia, Western China. Very typically, you might have heard or read some studies about tapping cheap solar resources from Africa and then export this energy to Europe. This might be true if you look at this map, because the cost of solar in African countries are relatively cheaper. But if we look at this map, this idea might be less attractive because the cost of solar in most of African countries are not necessarily lower compared with the cost in Spain. So in this case, the investors might think otherwise for their location choice of wind for solar installation. So this is a cost comparison for solar. And now let's move to the cost for wind. So this is a cost for wind based on uniform discount rate. From this map, we can find that the low cost of wind in Central US, North African countries, Central Asia, Australia, and also South Latin America. If we apply country-specific discount rate, we found that the North African countries and the South Latin America are no longer attractive for the installation of wind power. But the cost of wind is still relatively low in Central US, Saudi Arabia, and Australia. So from these two maps, we can understand the heterogeneity of discount rates may strongly affect the cost for wind and solar. And if we try to combine both maps, so basically for each grid cell, we combine the cost of wind and solar, and we select the lower cost to represent the renewable energy cost for each grid cell. We got to the next map. So in this map represents the cost of renewable energy technologies for the entire world. We combine both wind and solar. We see that countries such as the US, Saudi Arabia, and Western China, Australia display relatively low cost for renewable energy. However, we cannot say too much about the supply potential, because here it only tells us, okay, these countries have relatively low cost for renewable energy, but we don't know exactly what's their potential compared with their domestic demand. So we will use the next metric, which is renewable LCOE available for export, to quantify this potential. Here is an example for Spain. So basically, we have the supply curve of renewable energy for Spain. So we combine all the renewable energy, wind, solar, and hydropower for Spain. And then we sorted the cost from low to high. We got this supply curve. And then we have the demand curve. This is the balance point. The cost for this point is the cost at which Spain can be self-sufficient. And the surplus energy for this period can be used for export. For Spain, the renewable LCOE available for export or self-sufficiency is around $7 per megawatt hour, which is relatively low. And we then do this cost calculation for the entire world. So we calculated for roughly 167 countries. And for some big countries, such as Australia, we divide it into several sub-regions to understand the regional differences. I mean, we did this also for the US, China, Saudi Arabia, and these supergiant countries. And if we plug the results for each country into the map, we get the following result. So this is the renewable LCOE available for export for the entire world. Here, I want to emphasize a little bit the color. So here, the blue color represents the country which are not self-sufficient. Basically, their domestic renewable resources cannot cover their electricity demand. For the rest, I use green color to represent the cost. The darker the color is, the lower the electricity cost is. So if a country has a darker color, such as Saudi Arabia, it means the cost for this country to be self-sufficient is relatively low. So from this map, we can see that countries such as Japan, South Korea, countries like Netherlands, Belgium are not self-sufficient because lack of land. And also for some regions in big countries such as Eastern China, northeast of the US, because of the high demand intensity, these areas are not be able to be self-sufficient. But we also can observe a lot of regions or countries with relatively low cost for self-sufficiency, such as majority part of US, Mexico, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, West China, Australia. In Latin America, the cost for Chile and Peru are relatively low. So this map shows us if we consider the country-specific discount rate, and also we take the electricity demand into account, at which cost a country might be able to be self-sufficient. And this is only the cost part. The following question is, do these countries also have large potential for export? So I will show the results in the next figure. I will show the results in the next figure. I will skip this one. So this is a figure I want to remind you how we calculated the export potential. So here is the renewable LCOE available for export. And here is the assumed cost for trade. With this, we can quantify the export potential. So this is the surplus of energy supply compared with domestic demand. The surplus part actually represents the potential that can be used for export. And we calculated this for the entire world. We got the figure here. From this figure, we can see that if we assume a trade cost of $20 per megawatt hour, the entire export potential for the world is around 70 petawatt hour, which is roughly 3 times as much as the current global electricity demand. With this figure, we understand that the renewable potential for the 100% renewable world is relatively large. And when it comes to the specific countries, we can see that a lot of the export potential are concentrated in big countries such as US, China, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil. In total, these big countries account for more than half of the export potential. And very intuitively, if we increase the price of export to $30, we see a significant increase of export potential for the entire world and also for every country. So, and now we have seen the results of the cost for self-sufficiency or the cost for marginal export, and also see the export potential. So the intuitive question might be, okay, how would the evolution of the discount rate might affect the cost and how would the change of electricity demand might affect the potential for export. We do this in the sensitivity analysis part. Here is the results for cost sensitivity analysis. So in this case, I pick the LCOE available for export from the map. So basically, I select some countries and I sort the cost from low to high. So for example, Saudi Arabia has very low cost for renewable energy technology. So they're located here. For countries like South Korea, they are not self-sufficient. They are located in this part. So basically, this is from low to high trend figure. And in this figure, the case with uniform discount rate is represented by this blue circle. The case with half country risk premium is represented by this yellow triangle. The case with country-specific discount rate is represented with green square. And for the case with double demand, we use this red diamond to represent it. So 4 cases here. And if we try to categorize these countries, we can find 2 groups. The first group is the countries that is strongly affected by the potential future demand. Example of these countries is France. So for such countries, if you increase the electricity demand, the cost for self-sufficiency might increase significantly. Other examples are Vietnam, Italy, Germany, and the United Kingdom. In this case, if we double the electricity demand, these 4 countries are no longer self-sufficient. Another category of countries are countries that are strongly influenced by discount rate. So for such countries, they are typically countries now are enduring social or political unrest or economic crisis. A typical example is Argentina. So if you vary the discount rate for Argentina, you'll see the cost of renewable energy also varies significantly. So these are 2 kind of groups of countries. One is strongly influenced by energy demand. Another category is strongly influenced by the discount rate. The case of uniform discount rate represents an ideal future where the entire world has a sustainable development. And in such a future, the country-specific discount rate might converge to a global mean value, which is a relatively low value. In such an optimistic future, there is also enhanced feasibility of energy trade. So if we look at the export potential for different scenarios, we see that in the case of uniform discount rate, the export potential is the largest. And if we increase the heterogeneity of discount rates, we'll see a decrease of export potential. And if we further double the demand, the export potential is further shrinked. From the results of sensitivity analysis, we can see clearly the discount rate assumption and the potential future demand strongly influence the cost of renewable energy supply and also the potential for export. So far, our analyses are mainly based on pure LCOE calculation. And as you all know, LCOE calculation has some limitations. So here, we only consider the generation cost part. We don't consider the system integration cost for renewable energy system. As we might know, the cost for integration, such as variation management strategies, transmission, storage, and backup capacity, can escalate the cost for renewable energy system by 50% or even more. So we also did some model tests to see if our results for LCOE calculation can hold if system integration cost is considered. What we do is try to connect some regions or countries with transmission grids to see if we have a real energy system, this kind of trade still hosts. So in this case, we try to connect mainland of China to South Korea and Japan. Mainland of China is divided into several subregions. And we use a techno-economic cost optimization model for capacity expansion to model the entire region, try to see this investment pattern for different countries. Here is the result. So from this figure, we can see that, okay, so this part is the investment in different energy technologies for China, and this part is the optimal electricity supply mix for South Korea and Japan. From this figure, we can see that there is obvious over generation or oversupply in mainland China, and this energy is then exported to South Korea and Japan. From this very simple example, we can see that our results calculated based on LCOE also holds if a real system is applied. Now I will try to wrap up and also reflect a little bit on our study. So in this study, we first try to use country-specific discount rates to evaluate the cost of renewable energy supply. We found that the heterogeneity in discount rates highly influence the cost of providing renewable electricity. And by identifying countries with large cost escalation, if country-specific discount rate is applied, we can find the countries where these financial obstacles might constrain the transition to renewable energy. Such countries are Argentina or most of the countries in Africa. In these cases, the international institutes, such as the World Bank or development banks, can provide capital support with low financial cost to enhance the development of renewable energy. And for the second part of our study, we try to incorporate electricity demand in the analysis, and we try to quantify the cost at which a country might be self-sufficient. And we see that in this case as well, the heterogeneity of discount rates affect the cost for self-sufficiency and also affect the export potential. And by evaluating the cost and export potential for different countries, we found out that big countries such as the United States, China, Saudi Arabia might stand out as large regions with abundant low cost of renewable resources for export. So basically, in such countries, the renewable energy is cheap and also abundant with large potential for export. There are two cases I want to emphasize here. One is for Saudi Arabia. So basically, the current political stability or low discount rate is associated with fossil revenue for such countries. In a renewable future, if there is less export of fossil fuels from countries such as Saudi Arabia, their low cost for discount rates might no longer host. So this is one case I want to point out. Basically, the discount rate goes hand in hand with their fossil economy. If this economy no longer holds, then this result might be different. And another case is for United States and China. So the two biggest economies, they rely a lot on energy imports. In a renewable future, these two countries are no longer depending on energy import, but perhaps have potential for export, might have some consequences for the geopolitical landscape. And in terms of the export potential, the situation might be especially favorable for China because neighboring countries such as South Korea and Japan are not self-sufficient for renewable energy. I know the Harvard China project has a recent publication about producing hydrogen from offshore of China and export it to Japan. So these are some relevant cases for future international trade. And now I want to come to something we want to do for the next step for this study. It's an ongoing study. We had some feedbacks from the reviewers, and we will modify it. As you know, when we come to the renewable energy supply curve, we basically take into account onshore wind, solar PV, and solar rooftop. We don't have offshore and CSP for the next step, we'll try to incorporate offshore wind and a CSP into the analysis. And as I mentioned, the pure LCOE analysis might fail to reflect the cost of system integration for renewable energy. So we will also use energy system model to calculate the average electricity system cost for every country. By doing so, we try to show if our results based on LCOE analysis will still hold or not if the system integration cost is considered. And we also will do some calculation for hydrogen production costs. And as a following up study, what I'm doing now is to connect different continents. So for the following up study, we try to see the intercontinental supergrid. How would that affect the system cost and electricity supply mix? Is there any cost benefit of building such global supergrid? So these are all my presentation, and I have a preliminary draft of this study online. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Xiaoming. That was a very well concise summary of the results. There are two questions in the chat group. So Anurag, I think it might be easiest if you ask the question directly.
Yeah,
unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, Xiaoming. That was excellent. I felt like you really walked us through step by step every single graph, and it was very nice to follow. I just wanted to clarify for 2050 demand, I didn't catch where the number came from, and you showed us the sensitivity, so that kind of helps understand that. But I was just curious, like, does it include like aggressive electrification of electric mobility and even industry? Yeah, if you could clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. So for the demand for 2050, so in the base calculation, we use the demand estimation from SIP2 scenario. So basically, this is a scenario considering the midway for development, for population growth, GDP growth. So this is for the base calculation. But for the scientific analysis, we try to double the demand. It's a very simplified way. We tried to look at the other SSP scenarios and try to see if they have better, data records in terms of electrification. But what we found that from the EASA database, the electrification rate is relatively low. So we thought, the data there might be rather conservative. And also there are large uncertainties regarding this kind of estimation. So we did a relatively, simplified estimation, just double the demand. So this is what we do for the sensitivity analysis part.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Naisin, you have the second question.
Oh, thank you. Is it my
sorry, Mike. One more question in the chat group, and then it's you.
Yeah, you're the next.
Yeah, Naisin, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Xiaoming. It is a very interesting research. I noticed that the country-specific discount rate is very important in your research. I wonder how to calculate it. Is it because of the different country has different interest rates, so you borrow it or something else?
Yes, thanks for this question. Actually, you're right. This is very important for the results. And also maybe, one major contribution for this study is because we use this value. So basically here, the country-specific discount rate, we combine a risk-free baseline hurdle rate, which is 5%, which is also this discount rate typically used for advanced economies such as the US and Germany. On top of that, we add this country risk premium estimates from Damodaran. So the estimates from Damodaran is based on the credit default swap spreads from sovereign bond yields when the data are available. If the data are not available, the risk premium actually is from the sovereign credit risk ratings from Moody or S&P. So these are like financial indicators given by those international financial institutes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Mike. Yep.
Okay, so thank you again for a very interesting talk and very well delivered. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So I had a couple of questions. One was, does your consideration allow for offshore wind as well as onshore wind? And if you answer that, then I have another question.
Okay, so maybe I can try to answer this question first, and
Sure.
yeah, one by one. So it's a good point, Michael. So for this study so far, we don't include offshore wind. Our calculation is primarily based on onshore wind, solar rooftop, and a solar PV utility. But for the next step, we will do that because we have this global energy GIS package developed in our group. We can actually calculate the potential for the offshore, but for the better visualization of the map, we kind of excluded for the first stage, but we'll add that for sure. I think if we add that for some, in the supply curve, then some countries like Netherlands might be sufficient because they have this large North Sea area suitable for the installation of wind power. Those the cost might be high because offshore wind is still relatively expensive compared with onshore wind. Yeah.
So thank you. The other question I had is that when you consider the export, do you assume that you're exporting in a particular form? I mean, you mentioned our study here of exporting hydrogen to Japan. How do you assume the export is going to occur? And secondly, do you recognize a higher expense for export over a large distance compared to a small distance? How do you actually consider the export?
Okay, so this is actually a very terrific question. So we are trying to figure out this, how to really express this, in terms of export, because, on the one hand, it is not clear what is the future might be look like in terms of export. So this export might be in the form of, electricity via transmission grids, or hydrogen via pipeline, or via, shipping. And also there might be potential for this kind of like a large scale demand shift for the world level, like, shifting the steel industry or data center, this kind of stuff. So far, we are not very, specific in this version of paper. We kind of like remain agnostic in terms of potential future trade. And we actually had lots of discussions with researchers from different backgrounds. So far, as you see, our results is purely based on this kind of, national cost, and our analysis is based on the cost difference. We try to point out, the cost difference or the cost gap might provide an incentive to trigger the trade for spatial arbitrage, but we don't specify what kind of forms of arbitrage it might take. So we are thinking about try to calculate a little bit like a hydrogen cost or ammonia cost, but still we are, discussing that part, because for hydrogen, it's not clear, your domestic demand for hydrogen or the demand for export. So all these are assumption based or very blurry. So actually, yeah, I have to be honest. So I have no, absolute answer to you, Michael, but we are trying to figure out. So if you have any nice suggestions or comments, please feel free. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have other
Okay,
questions, Michael?
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Hayang, I guess you have your hand up.
Thank you, Xiaoming. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I have 3 questions. The first one is about the capital cost of the renewable facilities, like for solar and wind. While considering the capital cost for China and the US, do you consider that for those subregions, the cost for those equipments are different at different area currently in your model?
So Hayang, I got your question. So basically you are saying this capital cost or investment cost for wind and solar are country specific. So you're absolutely right. And I mean, sometimes even region specific. So for this study at this stage, we kind of try to reveal the effect of country specific discount rate. So we try to emphasize more on that part. So we kind of assume a uniform, investment cost for wind and solar across the world. Of course, for the sensitivity analysis, we'll add more, test, as you suggested, try to use different investment costs for different countries. So that was something we'll do for that. Yeah. What's your next question?
Okay, so currently the investment cost for different countries are the same, or it is a country-specific cost? I'm not very clear on that.
It's uniform cost for the entire world. So basically, US, India, and China had the same investment cost for wind and solar. So it's a uniform cost assumption.
Okay, and the second question is about also another question on kind of your inputs. I saw that the Eastern China is not sufficient to match their own demand in 2050. I'm very curious about the reason. So I think the potentially the problem is about the capacity you assume for the solar or wind installation. So currently, what's the per square meters capacity for solar and wind in your model? I'm just curious whether we are considering a very different, like the panel spacing here.
And okay. So the exact number, maybe let me just record it a bit, because number, yeah, we kind of assume for, I think is maybe around 20 watt or per square kilometers. I'm not sure about this value, but I can check it. And I mean, you are talking about power density, right? Yeah.
Yeah. The power density. Yeah.
Yeah, power density. So I cannot record the detail of this number here, but I can explain to you why. I mean, it's not actually because of the power density we assume, but it's mainly because in Eastern China, it's very population dense. So we kind of use a uniform assumption in terms of social acceptance. So we assume that for wind power, it cannot be installed in population density area because it's very noisy. You might face social acceptance problems. So for this case, we kind of exclude areas which are population dense. And Eastern China for sure has very high energy demand. So it's like, the load center without doubt. So basically high demand, no low land availability for installation of wind. And the solar, I mean, is relatively good, but also can be very cloudy in the summertime. So all these reasons combined together lead to the result that Eastern China might be not self-sufficient, relying on renewable energy. Of course, China, I mean, is one country, so they can have lots of internal trade with transmission grids, so it's no problem. But we kind of like try to see this kind of difference in big country, yeah.
So for those eastern places, even consider the rooftop solar panels is so the rooftop solar panel contribute a little share to the total generation?
Yes, I mean, they contribute. And also for our demand, we kind of assume increased demand for 2050. It's not demand for nowadays. So, or these kind of like, contributed to it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My last question is about the both rooftop system and also the utility scale systems. While for the grid calculation, you consider the integration of those systems into the grid. So how do you consider the difference for those distributed system and centralized system? The difference for them to connect to the grid, like for the storage required or the transmission required of the substations?
It's good. It's actually a good question. So, and for this study, actually, we don't look, in such details in terms of this kind of like integration of this decentralized or centralized, generation resources. But we kind of like, look at a relatively more economic modeling part. So we have a technical economic model to consider this kind of integration of cost for storage, for transmission. But it's kind of like, for distributed like rooftop and utility scale solar PV, we kind of treated them as the same. So basically, we consider transmission cost and then storage for this denied variation management. So we don't really distinguish here, because here is rather to look at the country difference. We don't really dig into the details for a specific country. So if we want to look at say the policy in China, relevant for the national policy, maybe then it's important to really dig into these details. So Haiyan, did I answer your question?
Yeah, yes, it's great. I'm just curious, because myself, I currently want to do some work on kind of rationalize what's the like for both utility scale and district scale, how they can compete with each other. So I'm just curious how you did in your research. Yeah, that's utility.
We
can talk more about that.
Let's go to the next question. Yangxi, your turn.
Thank you for taking my question. I have a quick question for the electricity demand prediction. It's based on your Xiaoming's response to Anurag's question. If I understand it correctly, on page 4 of your slide, or maybe 3, you
it's
make
okay.
assumption of the you explained you make assumptions based on the SSP2.
Yes.
So my question is why you choose SSP2? I fully understand it is kind of a moderate developed pathway, but there is a problem because the SSP2 means we can only control the temperature rise within 2 degrees. So this is far from enough. It means we cannot achieve the carbon net zero before 2100. So, why not considering SSP1? I mean, you mentioned you also referred to the YASA study. I guess whether you mean the Oliver Frico's study in 2017, 7 years ago. But because the SSP2 is not really consistent with our expectations towards a carbon neutrality future. And according to the debates happening in the COP27 recently, people even think if we control temperature rise within 1.5 degrees, far from enough. So my question is, why not considering SSP1 as your basic assumption? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's a very good question. So my answer to you is we should maybe include different SSP scenarios to reflect more on potential futures. So I mean, this is absolutely valid to shed light more on the potential futures. So yeah, I think we will handle that demand part, because we actually also received the reviewer comments regarding this part assumption. So we will do an extensive sensitivity analysis for different demand assumption in terms of electrification, electric fuel production. So this is what we will plan. What do we plan to do? So hopefully a new version of our study will give you more results. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I just one suggestion is maybe the message model from YASA, they have the result for the electricity demand of SSP1 now. Okay. I'm not sure, but let's check for that. That might be helpful, because this scenario might be more convincing and interesting for policymakers and the stakeholders. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for the information. Yeah, I will check that. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mike, did you have another question? Mike? You unmute yourself now.
No, I was simply going to comment on what would be interesting as a future study would be to take an individual country, say the US or China or India, and to examine in 2050 how they might most efficiently distribute their excess to the extent that they have an excess, to make it really a country-specific study, including looking at the expense and the opportunity and the means to transfer the energy to neighbors.
Mike, can I ask, when you say about the trading to neighbors, you mean integrated model with different sectors? I mean, you mean with sector coupling with everything, or electricity only?
Well, I was thinking, for example, in the case of China, if you're going to do next generation sort of study, you want to make sure that you're properly taking care of the internal distribution of the energy inside China, and also need to consider the offshore wind potential. And then,
Yes.
to the extent that you want to consider exports, clearly you target as the exports, presumably South Korea and Japan, and you have to think about exactly how do you most efficiently deal with that, and what are the costs. Now, for the U.S., it would be a different matter. I mean, you showed that the major wind source in the U.S. onshore is in the middle of the country. Okay, so you need to consider the transmission links. If you're going to export it, where are you going to export? I mean, presumably not to Canada. Canada presumably has more than enough potential generation capacity as well. So where would the U.S. target its exports, and in what form?
Thanks for the input. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
Yes, John Evans, you have a comment.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Man. Xiaoming, it was a great talk, well presented. Now that you have this slide on the screen, I want to ask my question. And I should start by saying I'm in public health. I'm not an economist, but it wasn't clear to me whether on this graph, the export potential is determined. So 1.3 or something like that in this figure is the maximum that you could possibly produce. And if then you just go up to the demand curve, supply and demand curve, and figure out what the cost for trade is that the way this works?
And yes, so far is this is simplified way to say, okay, there is this amount of export potential. So this is it's a relatively simplified way without thinking about the conversion cost, like to convert electricity to hydrogen, or the extra cost of pipeline or transmission grids. So this is I would to say rather indicative way to compare different countries than absolute value. So it's some indicative results, yeah. But for the next step, we are going to consider all those parts. So instead of this amount of gap here, but we might have this amount being covered by transmission grids, pipelines, or conversion cost. So we only have this amount left in terms of economic gap. So that might be a potential result, but that will also happen to every country if we do the same, use the consistent method. So far we needed to prove the LCOE analyses are robust. So yeah.
Thank you. I just want to pursue this a little more though. If that's true, should that green curve even extend beyond the point where cost for trade and export potential intersect? In other words, why won't they produce more? What's limiting the amount of potential supply?
So there is no such limit here. It's just here, we assume a cost of trade. So this is like, the benchmark. If you produce below this point, you make money. If you produce above this, you cannot cover your cost. So this is a rather, a break-even point. So there is incentive. If your local cost is lower than this, then you produce either electricity or hydrogen for export. So this is like somehow a man-made, break-even point. So this does not mean the export potential will stop here. You can extend this to as much as you like, but you might face the consequence. It's not economical. So that is the only thing here. Yeah.
Okay. So, and that cost for trade is then reaches some equilibrium across the world. That's the other part I'm trying to understand, how the countries are connected to each other if that's not fixed by a limit on supply. Where does
I mean,
that come from?
I mean, yeah, ideally, I mean, if all the countries are interconnected with transmission grids, then you might, have this kind of like, world electricity price, whatever. But
Okay.
in this case, it's more like, we can assume like a case like you're trading oil. So you have like, average price from OPEC or this kind of like a renting there. So
Right.
something like that. So you see my point. Yeah.
Okay, and so you, just one last thing then. So you run the whole analysis under one assumption about the cost per trade, is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks,
That's
John.
great.
Thanks so much.
Sure.
Okay, I have questions too, but it's already past 4 o'clock, so I'll save it for next time. So I think we would like to thank our speaker. It's already 10 o'clock in Sweden, so thank you very much, and we look forward to connecting with you again.
Thank you very much, guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Okay, very good. We will catch up with you. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.